The night my own son tried to kill me, the ocean was so quiet it almost felt peaceful. The moon reflected across the black water as our yacht drifted miles off the California coast. I had stepped outside for air when I heard Lucas whisper to his wife behind me, his voice low and cold. Just one push, and the $520 million becomes ours. My heart stopped. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. My son and his wife hadn't invited me on this yacht to celebrate family. They had brought me there to make sure I never came back. But what they didn't know was that I had already begun preparing for this night, long before we ever left the harbor. Before I continue, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy stories about truth, justice, and the complicated bonds of family. And I'd really love to know, where are you watching from today? And what time is it there right now? Drop it in the comments. Hearing from people around the world always reminds me that none of us face life's darkest moments alone. To understand how my life ended up on that dark stretch of ocean, you have to understand where everything began. My name is Cynthia Perez. I'm 63 years old, and for most of my life, I believed two things with absolute certainty: that hard work could build anything, and that family was the one thing money could never corrupt. I learned later how wrong the second belief could be. My husband Miguel Perez and I met when we were both barely in our 20s. Miguel worked long shifts loading cargo ships in the port of San Diego, and I was studying business at a community college while waiting tables at night. We didn't have money connections or any kind of safety net. What we had was stubbornness. Miguel used to say the ocean taught him patience. Cargo ships didn't care about your schedule or your feelings. Storms delayed everything. Ports shut down. Containers got lost. But if you kept showing up and kept working, eventually something moved. That philosophy became the foundation of our lives. We started our first business with a borrowed truck and a rented warehouse that smelled like motor oil and rusted metal. At the beginning, we weren't even a shipping company. We were just two people helping local manufacturers move goods from their factories to the port. But Miguel understood logistics in a way few people did. He could look at a shipment schedule and see inefficiencies no one else noticed. Slowly, companies started trusting us with bigger contracts. By the time Lucas was born, our little operation had grown into a real business. Perez Global Shipping. I remember the day we printed the first official sign with our company name. Miguel hung it crooked on the warehouse wall, and we both laughed because it looked so much bigger than we felt. We worked insane hours, 12, 14, sometimes 16 hours a day. There were nights we slept in the office because we couldn't afford to hire enough employees yet. But every year the company grew. When Lucas was a child, the docks were practically his playground. He used to run between rows of shipping containers with a little yellow hard hat Miguel bought him. The dock workers adored him. "Little boss is here," they'd say whenever he showed up. Back then, Lucas was the center of our world. He was bright, curious, and kind in a way that made people trust him instantly. He asked questions about everything: ship's routes, contracts, engines, even the complicated paperwork I handled in the office. Miguel would lift him onto his shoulders and say proudly, "One day all of this will be yours." And for many years, I believed that would happen exactly the way we imagined. Perez Global Shipping eventually expanded far beyond what we dreamed. We moved from our rusty warehouse into a modern headquarters overlooking the bay. Our company handled international logistics contracts with manufacturers across the country. Eventually, a large investment group approached us with an offer to buy a significant portion of the company. Miguel and I spent months debating the decision. Selling part of the company meant security, something we had never truly had before. But it also meant giving up a piece of the business we had built with our own hands. In the end, we agreed. The deal changed everything. After the sale, we established a family trust valued at around $520 million. It included company shares, real estate investments, and long-term financial holdings. The trust was structured to support our family for generations. Miguel insisted on something very specific when we created it. The money should never control our family, he said during one of the meetings with our lawyers. It should protect them. At the time, that sounded wise. Now I sometimes wonder if wealth protects anything at all. Life continued peacefully for several years after that. Lucas graduated from college and joined the company. Miguel began slowly stepping back from day-to-day operations, mentoring Lucas, while enjoying the success we had worked decades to achieve. Then everything changed. Miguel suffered a sudden heart attack when he was 60. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning. One moment we were having coffee in our kitchen overlooking the ocean, and the next moment he collapsed onto the floor. The doctors tried, but they couldn't save him. The weeks after Miguel's death passed in a blur of paperwork, condolences, and a kind of numb grief I can't fully describe. Losing your partner after 40 years feels like someone has erased half of your identity. For a while, Lucas became my anchor. He stepped up at the company. He checked on me constantly. Some nights he would come by the house just to sit with me on the patio and talk about his father. "I'll make him proud," Lucas promised once, and for a time I believed he would. Then Lucas met Madison. Madison Cole was beautiful in the polished, confident way that makes people immediately notice her when she enters a room. She worked in corporate consulting and had a reputation for helping companies restructure and expand. Lucas introduced her to me during a dinner at a restaurant overlooking the harbor. At first I liked her. She was charming, articulate, and clearly intelligent. She asked thoughtful questions about our company and our history. She even listened patiently as I told stories about Miguel. But looking back, I remember something else, too. Madison asked a lot of questions about the trust. At the time, I thought she was simply curious about the structure of family businesses. Many people in her industry were fascinated by long-term financial planning. Still, the frequency of those questions lingered in my mind. "How exactly is the trust managed?" she asked one evening over dinner. "Who controls the voting rights for the assets? What happens when you eventually retire?" They were reasonable questions on the surface, but there was a sharpness behind them I didn't quite understand yet. Lucas and Madison married less than a year later. The wedding was beautiful, held at a vineyard in Napa Valley, with hundreds of guests, music and laughter that echoed through the hills long into the night. I remember watching Lucas dance with Madison under strings of lights and feeling something close to relief. Maybe life was stabilizing again. Maybe our family was entering a new chapter. For a while, that seemed to be true. Lucas took on more responsibilities at Perez Global Shipping. Madison occasionally advised on corporate strategy. Together, they looked like the perfect next generation of leadership. But slowly, something began to change. Lucas started bringing up the trust more often. At first, the conversations were casual. "Mom, have you thought about stepping back from managing everything yourself? You've worked your whole life. You deserve to relax." He said these things with a smile, and I assumed he was simply concerned about my well-being. But the conversations became more frequent, then more serious. Madison began joining those discussions too. "You should consider consolidating authorities," she suggested one evening at my house. "It would simplify long-term planning." I remember looking at Lucas, expecting him to dismiss the idea. Instead, he nodded. "Madison's right," he said. That was the first moment something inside me shifted. Not fear. Not yet. Just the quiet realization that my son might not see the world the way he once had. And that realization would grow slowly, day by day, until it eventually led us all to that dark night on the ocean. The night Lucas whispered the words that shattered everything I believed about family. Looking back now, I can see the moment things truly began to shift. But at the time, it didn't feel like danger. It felt like distance. At first, the changes in Lucas were subtle, small enough that I convinced myself I was imagining them. After Miguel died, I told myself grief affected people differently. Maybe Lucas was simply overwhelmed by responsibility. After all, he had suddenly become the primary face of our company while I was still struggling to recover from losing my husband. But over time, the small changes began forming a pattern. Lucas stopped visiting as often. The late-night conversations on my patio disappeared. The quiet moments where we would talk about Miguel, about the company, about the future, those faded away, until weeks sometimes passed without us speaking. When we did talk, the subject almost always returned to the same thing. The trust. At first, Lucas approached it gently. "Mom, you're still handling too much," he told me one afternoon in my office overlooking the harbor. "You shouldn't have to manage everything alone." "I'm not alone," I reminded him. "We have lawyers, advisors, accountants." "That's not the same," he said. He leaned forward across the desk, his voice soft but insistent. "You should let me take over more of the decision-making." There was nothing unreasonable about the suggestion. Lucas was nearly 40 years old and already involved in the company. One day, he would inevitably inherit responsibility for the family assets. But Miguel and I had built the trust with a very specific structure. No single person controlled everything. That structure existed for a reason. Eventually, yes, I told him calmly. But not yet. Lucas smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. Just think about it. That phrase would become very familiar in the months that followed. Just think about it. A few weeks later, Lucas returned with paperwork. This is just a restructuring proposal, he explained while placing the documents on my dining table. Our advisors say it would simplify management. I flipped through the pages slowly. The language was complex layers of legal terminology designed to appear routine, but something about it made my instincts uneasy. I'd like Andrew Keller to review this first, I said. Andrew had been our family attorney for more than 25 years. He helped Miguel and me create the original trust, and I trusted him completely. Lucas hesitated. Do we really need to involve Andrew? He asked. Yes, I replied. The smile disappeared from his face for a brief moment before returning again. Of course, but something about the exchange left a strange feeling in my chest. Later that week, I met Andrew at his office downtown. His firm occupied the top floor of a glass building overlooking San Diego Bay. From his window, we could see cargo ships slowly moving toward the harbor ships our company had probably helped coordinate. Andrew read the documents quietly for nearly 20 minutes. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed. This is concerning, he said. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? These revisions would give Lucas full administrative control over the trust. That was the idea, I said carefully. He wants to manage things eventually. Andrew shook his head. This goes further than that. He turned one page and tapped a paragraph with his pen. If you sign this, Lucas could make financial decisions without your approval. He could liquidate assets, transfer holdings, even restructure the trust entirely. That doesn't sound like what he described. Andrew nodded slowly. There's another issue. He slid the document toward me. This clause activates if something happens to you. My eyes moved across the text. In the event of the grantor's incapacitation or unexpected death, my chest grew tight as I continued reading. The language transferred immediate full control of the trust to Lucas. Not shared oversight? Not advisory review. Total control. That's aggressive, I murmured. Andrew folded his hands on the desk. Cynthia, I'm going to ask you something directly. I looked up. Do you believe Lucas is acting entirely on his own? The question lingered in the air between us. Images of Madison flashed through my mind, her sharp questions about the trust, her interest in restructuring corporate leadership, the way she studied financial reports during family dinners. I'm not sure, I admitted. Andrew leaned back in his chair. I recommend you don't sign anything for now. I wasn't planning to. Good. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside the window, a container ship moved slowly across the water, its massive frame cutting through the afternoon sunlight. Then Andrew said something that would echo in my mind for weeks afterward. Just be careful. I frowned slightly. Careful of what? Andrew hesitated. I've handled family trusts for 30 years, he said. When large amounts of money are involved, people sometimes change. I wanted to dismiss the idea immediately. Lucas was my son. The boy who once ran through shipping containers wearing a tiny yellow hard hat. The child Miguel carried on his shoulders while explaining how cargo routes worked. But the uneasiness inside me had already begun growing. Over the next few weeks, Lucas brought up the trust again. Then again, and again. Each conversation carried a little more pressure than the last. You're being overly cautious, he said one evening. Andrew Keller is old school, Madison added during another discussion. The financial world moves faster now. I tried to remain patient. I'm not refusing forever, I told them. I just want time. But patience seemed to frustrate them. Lucas became shorter in our conversations. Madison's polite charm slowly shifted into subtle impatience. Then one afternoon, Lucas called me with what sounded like an entirely different idea. Mom, he said cheerfully, let's take a trip. A trip. Just the three of us. A short yacht vacation up the coast. I laughed softly. Since when do you want family vacations? He chuckled. Since we've all been working too hard. Madison came onto the phone a moment later. You deserve a break, Cynthia, she said warmly. You've spent your whole life building everything for this family. The sincerity in her voice sounded convincing. Still, something about the offer unsettled me. I'll think about it, I replied. After we hung up, I sat quietly in my living room staring out at the ocean beyond my windows. The waves rolled slowly against the shore, calm and endless. Miguel used to say the ocean revealed people's true nature. Out there, surrounded by nothing but water, there were no distractions, no crowds, no escape. Just people and their choices. At the time, I didn't realize how prophetic that thought would become, because that yacht trip Lucas suggested would soon place me in the middle of the most terrifying moment of my life, the moment I realized my own son might be willing to kill me. The idea of the yacht trip lingered in my mind for several days. On the surface, it sounded harmless, even thoughtful. Lucas had framed it as a chance for us to reconnect after months of tension and long hours at work. Madison had emphasized relaxation, sunshine, and family time, but something about it made my instincts uneasy. Perhaps it was Andrew Keller's warning still echoing in my head, or perhaps it was the quiet realization that Lucas had never suggested anything like this before. Still, I tried to be reasonable. Families argue. Families go through difficult phases. After Miguel's death, our entire dynamic had shifted. Maybe Lucas truly did want to repair the distance between us. So 3 days later, I called him back. "Tell me about this yacht trip," I said. Lucas sounded instantly enthusiastic. "It'll just be a short cruise up the California coast," he explained. 2 nights. We leave from Marina del Rey and head toward Santa Barbara. Good food, fresh air, no phones buzzing all day. Madison chimed in from the background. "And sunsets," she added cheerfully. "You'll love it." Lucas continued describing the yacht. It belonged to a charter company he had used before for corporate events, luxurious but private. A small crew, experienced captain, plenty of space. "It's exactly what we all need," he said. I hesitated. "Who else is coming?" "No one," Lucas replied quickly. "Just us." That answer made me pause. In the past, Lucas loved inviting friends, colleagues, or business partners to events like this. A trip with only the 3 of us felt unusual. But after another moment of silence, I finally said the words he was waiting for. "All right." Lucas sounded genuinely pleased. "Great, now we leave Friday morning." When we hung up, I stood near the large windows in my living room overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The waves rolled steadily toward the shore, silver under the afternoon sun. I told myself I was overthinking things. Still, something deep in my chest refused to fully relax. The following day, I called Andrew Keller. I accepted Lucas's invitation, I told him. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "The yacht trip." "Yes," Andrew exhaled slowly. "Cynthia, I'm not saying you shouldn't go," he said carefully, "but if your instincts are telling you something is wrong, you should listen." "That's exactly the problem," I admitted. "My instincts are confused." Andrew was quiet for a moment. "Then let's take a precaution." "What kind of precaution?" "I want to bring someone in," he said. "A private investigator, someone discreet." I frowned slightly. "That seems dramatic." Maybe Andrew replied, "But you're dealing with $500 million in assets. People have done far worse things for much less." His words made my stomach tighten. After a moment, I said quietly, "All right." 2 days later, I met Detective Raymond Brooks. Raymond looked nothing like the dramatic private investigators you see in movies. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, calm, with the relaxed posture of someone who had spent decades observing people. Andrew introduced us in his office. Raymond worked 25 years in homicide before retiring, Andrew explained. Now he handles private investigations. Raymond shook my hand firmly. "Nice to meet you, Miss Perez." "Cynthia is fine," I said. We sat down at a small conference table. Raymond listened patiently as I explained the situation, the trust discussions, the pressure from Lucas and Madison, the restructuring documents Andrew had reviewed. When I finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "Do you believe your son intends to harm you?" he asked. The question felt surreal. "I don't know," I admitted. Raymond leaned forward slightly. "Then we treat this as a precaution." "What would that involve?" "We monitor the situation," he said, discreetly. He outlined several possibilities. Small audio recorders could be placed in my luggage. GPS tracking could monitor the yacht's route. Raymond himself could remain nearby in a separate vessel if necessary. "It's unlikely you'll need any of it," he added calmly. "But if something unusual happens, we'll know." The practicality of his tone reassured me. "Let's do it," I said. Over the next 2 days, Raymond prepared everything quietly. The devices were tiny, barely noticeable. One audio recorder was sewn into the lining of a travel bag. Another was hidden inside a compact cosmetic case. "Just carry these normally," Raymond instructed. "You don't need to do anything else." "What about the yacht itself?" I asked. "I'll follow from a distance," he said, "far enough that no one notices." The plan still felt excessive, but something about it also made me feel safer. Friday morning arrived with perfect California weather. Bright sun, clear skies, a gentle breeze rolling in from the Pacific. Lucas greeted me warmly when I arrived at the marina. "Mom," he said, hugging me tightly, "you made it." Madison followed close behind, dressed in a crisp white outfit and oversized sunglasses. "You look wonderful," she said with a smile. The yacht itself was impressive, sleek, modern, easily over 100 feet long. Its polished surfaces gleamed under the sunlight as crew members moved efficiently across the deck, preparing for departure. Lucas introduced me to the captain. "This is Captain Derek Shaw," he said. Derek shook my hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Perez." His grip was firm, though his eyes flickered briefly toward Lucas before returning to me. Perhaps I imagined that glance. Soon the engines hummed to life. As the yacht slowly pulled away from the marina, the skyline of Los Angeles faded behind us. For the first few hours, everything felt almost normal. We sat on the upper deck eating lunch while the coastline stretched endlessly beside us. Lucas talked about expansion opportunities for the company. Madison shared stories about consulting projects she was working on. They laughed, they joked, they asked about my hobbies and whether I planned to travel more. Anyone watching us would have seen a perfectly happy family enjoying a luxury cruise. But every so often I noticed small details. Lucas checking his phone and then quickly locking the screen when I glanced over. Madison exchanging brief looks with him across the table. Captain Derek appearing more frequently than necessary near our seating area. Nothing obvious. Nothing that proved anything. Just enough to keep my instincts quietly alert. By evening, the yacht had moved farther up the coast. The sun began dipping toward the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and violet. Madison stood near the railing, watching the sunset. "It's beautiful out here," she said softly. Lucas joined her. I watched them from across the deck. For a brief moment, they looked like any young couple enjoying a romantic evening. Then Madison leaned toward Lucas and whispered something. Lucas nodded slightly, and both of them turned their eyes toward me. The look lasted only a second, but it was enough to send a cold shiver down my spine, because suddenly I remembered Raymond Brooks' calm voice 2 days earlier. If something unusual happens, we'll know. That night, as the yacht drifted miles away from the shore under a darkening sky, I began to understand something deeply unsettling. Whatever Lucas and Madison had planned for this trip, it had already begun. That first evening on the yacht felt strangely normal, almost too normal. After the sunset, the crew served dinner on the upper deck. Soft lights illuminated the polished wooden table, while the ocean stretched endlessly around us, dark and calm under the stars. Madison had insisted on choosing the menu herself. Fresh seafood, grilled vegetables, a bottle of expensive wine. Lucas claimed he had been saving for a special occasion. To anyone watching it looked like a perfect family evening. Lucas told stories about recent business deals. Madison laughed easily, occasionally reaching for his hand across the table. And I played my part. I smiled. I nodded. I asked questions about their work, their plans, their future. But inside, something felt off. Not something obvious, no raised voices, no hostility. Just a strange tension hidden beneath the surface, like the quiet pressure in the air before a storm. I noticed how Lucas barely touched his wine. I noticed how Madison kept glancing toward the staircase that led down to the lower deck. And most of all, I noticed how often they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Around 10 o'clock, the crew began clearing the table. "I think I'm going to turn in," I said, casually pushing my chair back. Lucas stood immediately. "Long day," he agreed. Madison smiled. "Sleep well, Cynthia." The use of my first name instead of Mom struck me as odd, but I didn't comment on it. I made my way down to the guest cabin Lucas had assigned me. The room was spacious, softly lit, with a wide window showing the dark ocean rolling past outside. Once the door closed behind me, I sat quietly on the edge of the bed. My heart was beating faster than I expected. Nothing had happened yet, but my instincts were screaming. I changed into comfortable clothes and turned off the main light, leaving only the small bedside lamp glowing softly in the corner. Then I waited. I don't know exactly how much time passed. Maybe 30 minutes, maybe an hour. Eventually, the yacht grew quiet. The distant hum of the engines vibrated through the walls, steady and low. Somewhere above, I heard footsteps crossing the deck. Then silence. I lay down on the bed and closed my eyes. But I didn't fall asleep. Instead, sometime around midnight, I heard something. Voices. At first they were faint, barely audible through the walls. Then I realized they weren't coming from outside my cabin. They were coming from the hallway. I held my breath. The voices moved slowly past my door. Lucas and Madison. I slipped quietly out of bed and walked toward the door. The hallway outside was dimly lit by small wall lights. I opened the door just enough to hear more clearly. Their voices drifted from the staircase leading to the rear deck. "Are you sure?" Lucas was saying quietly. Madison's voice followed, calm and confident. "Relax, everything is ready." My pulse started pounding in my ears. I stepped into the hallway, moving slowly so the floorboards wouldn't creak. Years of running a shipping company had taught me how to move quietly in unfamiliar environments. The voices continued as they reached the lower deck. "We just need the right moment," Madison said. Lucas hesitated. "What if someone notices?" Madison let out a soft, almost amused laugh. "Lucas, we're miles from shore." A long silence followed. Then Lucas spoke again, his voice lower. "And the cameras?" My stomach tightened. "They're off," Madison replied. "Derek handled it." "Derek?" "Captain Derek Shaw." Another silence. The ocean outside the yacht shifted with a soft rolling sound, waves tapping gently against the hull. Then Madison spoke again. "Once it's done, it'll look like she slipped." My chest felt suddenly hollow. Lucas didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded strained. "It's still my mother." Madison's tone hardened slightly. "And if she lives another 20 years... Lucas said nothing. Madison continued, each word slow and deliberate. "That trust is worth $520 million. My hands began to tremble. I leaned slightly closer to the staircase, barely daring to breathe. Madison's voice dropped to a whisper. "One push, and it all becomes ours." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't think. My mind struggled to accept what I was hearing. My own son, the boy I had raised, the child Miguel carried on his shoulders across the shipping docks. He was standing somewhere above me on this yacht discussing how to kill me. Lucas finally spoke again, his voice almost fragile. "What if something goes wrong?" Madison sighed. "Nothing will go wrong." She paused. "Accidents happen at sea all the time." The sentence echoed through the quiet hallway like a gunshot. Lucas exhaled slowly. "Tonight." "Yes." My heart began racing so fast it hurt. Madison continued calmly. "After midnight, the crew stays below unless Derek calls them. We'll invite her up to the back deck. Say we want to watch the stars." Lucas didn't respond. Madison's voice softened slightly. "You wanted this, Lucas." Another silence. Then Lucas spoke the words that shattered something deep inside me. "Just one push." He stopped. Madison finished the sentence for him. "And the $520 million becomes ours." I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. My son had just agreed to murder me. The hallway felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. For a brief moment, pure fear flooded my mind. What was I supposed to do now? I was alone on a yacht miles from shore with two people who had already decided I wouldn't survive the night. Then another thought appeared. Raymond Brooks, Andrew Keller, the preparations we had made, the tiny recorder hidden inside my travel bag. They were capturing every word. I closed my eyes for a moment and forced myself to breathe slowly. Panic wouldn't help me. I had one advantage. Lucas and Madison believed I was asleep. They believed their secret conversation was safe. And that meant I still had time. Time to think. Time to prepare. Time to survive. Slowly, carefully, I stepped back into my cabin and closed the door without making a sound. Outside, I could still hear faint movement on the deck above. The ocean rolled endlessly around the yacht, dark and cold beneath the stars. And somewhere out there in the vast black water surrounding us, Detective Raymond Brooks was waiting. Because Lucas and Madison thought they had just planned the perfect accident. What they didn't know was that their entire conversation had just become evidence. Evidence that might save my life. When I closed the cabin door behind me, the silence inside the room felt almost suffocating. For several seconds, I simply stood there, staring at the floor, trying to slow the pounding in my chest. My son had just agreed to kill me. Even now, remembering that moment, it still feels surreal. There are certain truths the human mind refuses to accept easily. Hearing Lucas speak those words, hearing him consider pushing me into the ocean as if it were merely a financial decision felt like reality had cracked open beneath my feet. But shock doesn't last forever. Eventually survival takes over. I forced myself to breathe slowly, just like Miguel used to do during stressful negotiations. Inhale, exhale, think. The most important thing was simple. Lucas and Madison believed I didn't know their plan. That gave me an advantage. I crossed the cabin and opened my travel bag quietly. My fingers found the tiny recorder sewn into the lining. A faint red light blinked softly. Still active. Good. Every word they had spoken was captured. That meant Andrew Keller would already have the evidence he needed. Raymond Brooks would hear it as well. But evidence alone wouldn't save me tonight. I still had to survive the next few hours. I moved quickly but carefully. First, I slipped on the thin flotation vest Raymond had given me before the trip. It was designed to fit beneath clothing lightweight, nearly invisible if you didn't know it was there. At the time Raymond had handed it to me, I almost laughed. Now I understood why he insisted. Next, I checked the small GPS transmitter hidden inside the pocket of my jacket. Another blinking light confirmed it was working. Raymond would be able to track my location in real time. If I ended up in the water, he would know exactly where to find me. I zipped the jacket slowly and glanced at the cabin mirror. From the outside, nothing looked unusual. Just a 63-year-old woman in comfortable clothes spending the night on a luxury yacht. Except now I knew I might be fighting for my life within minutes. I sat down on the edge of the bed again. Think. What would Lucas and Madison expect? Madison had already explained a part of the plan. They would invite me onto the back deck to watch the stars. That meant they needed me awake, which meant they would come soon. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 15. The waiting felt endless. I watched the small digital clock beside the bed as the seconds ticked by. 12:07 a.m., 12:11 a.m., 12:16 a.m. Then finally, a soft knock on the door. My muscles tightened. "Mom," Lucas's voice. I forced my expression into something calm and slightly sleepy before opening the door. Lucas stood in the hallway, leaning casually against the frame as if nothing in the world were wrong. Madison stood just behind him, smiling. "Sorry if we woke you," Lucas said. "We thought you might like to see something." "What is it?" I asked, rubbing my eyes slightly. "The stars," Madison said brightly. "It's incredible out tonight." I hesitated, letting the moment stretch just long enough to feel natural. Then I nodded. "All right." Lucas stepped aside so I could walk into the hallway. The three of us moved quietly up the staircase toward the rear deck. Each step felt heavier than the last. My senses sharpened in a strange way. I noticed everything, the faint vibration of the engines, the smell of salt in the air, the way the yacht shifted gently with the movement of the waves. When we reached the deck, the ocean opened around us in every direction. Miles of darkness. The sky above glittered with stars, brighter than I had seen in years. Madison walked toward the railing first. "Isn't it beautiful?" she said softly. I joined her near the edge. Lucas remained slightly behind me, exactly where Madison had planned. The wind tugged gently at my hair as I stared out over the water. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to remember another night on the ocean many years earlier. Miguel and I had taken a small fishing boat far offshore, celebrating our 20th anniversary. We sat together watching the stars reflect on the water, talking about Lucas's future. Miguel had squeezed my hand and said something I never forgot. "No matter what happens in life, remember this, you're stronger than you think." That memory steadied me. Behind me, Lucas shifted his weight. I could hear his breathing. Madison leaned casually against the railing beside me. "So peaceful out here," she murmured. "Yes," I agreed. Another silence followed. The tension in the air grew thicker with every passing second. Lucas took one step closer, then another. I could feel his presence directly behind me now. I didn't turn around. Madison's eyes flicked briefly toward him. A silent signal. This was the moment. Lucas's hand moved toward my back. I could almost feel the hesitation in his movement, the final moment before betrayal becomes action. But Lucas and Madison had made one mistake. They assumed they were the ones controlling this moment. Just before Lucas could touch me, I took a step backward, then another. "Careful," Madison said quickly. Too quickly. Her eyes widened slightly. I let my foot slide across the deck as if I'd lost my balance. My body tilted sideways toward the railing. Lucas's hand shot forward instinctively, but he was a fraction of a second too late. I grabbed the railing briefly, then let my grip slip. And I fell. The cold ocean swallowed me instantly. The shock of the water stole the breath from my lungs as I plunged beneath the surface. Darkness surrounded me. The yacht's lights blurred above as bubbles rushed past my face. For a moment, I simply drifted downward, the weight of the ocean pressing around me. Then instinct took over. I kicked upward, fighting through the freezing water until my head finally broke the surface. Air rushed into my lungs. Above me, the yacht loomed like a massive shadow against the night sky. For a second, there was silence. Then Madison's voice echoed from the deck. "Oh my God." Her tone sounded convincing, almost theatrical. Lucas's voice followed, filled with what sounded like panic. "Mom." I stayed still in the water, letting the flotation vest keep me afloat. The yacht drifted slowly nearby, its engine still running. From the deck, Lucas leaned over the railing. "Mom," he shouted again. Madison grabbed his arm. "Lucas, it's too dark. We can't see her." Her voice trembled with fake fear. "She must have slipped," she continued loudly. The deck was wet. Lucas said nothing. From the water, I watched them carefully. Madison wrapped her arms around Lucas as if comforting him. But when she looked down toward the ocean, she smiled. "Tatana." Just for a second, a small, satisfied smile that told me everything I needed to know. Then she turned Lucas away from the railing. "We should call it in," she said loudly. "But by the time anyone gets here—" Her voice trailed off. The implication hung in the air. Behind the yacht, the vast Pacific stretched endlessly into darkness. They believed the ocean would finish what they had started. But somewhere beyond the edge of that darkness, a second boat was already moving toward my signal. Detective Raymond Brooks had been waiting, and now he knew exactly where I was. The Pacific Ocean is far colder at night than most people expect. The moment my body hit the water, the shock cut through me like a blade. Even with the flotation vest hidden beneath my jacket, the icy temperature clawed at my muscles, stealing warmth and strength with terrifying speed. For a few seconds after I surfaced, I focused on one thing only: breathing. Inhale. Exhale. Stay calm. Above me, the massive shape of the yacht drifted slowly across the dark water. Its lights cast long reflections across the rolling waves, but from where I floated, the deck was difficult to see clearly, which meant Lucas and Madison couldn't see me clearly either. That was good, because if Lucas had looked down and realized I was still floating nearby, he might have tried to finish what he started. The ocean rose and fell beneath me in slow, heavy swells. Each movement pushed me slightly farther away from the yacht. I kept my arms close to my sides, conserving energy. The flotation vest did its job quietly, keeping my head above water with minimal effort. From the deck above, I heard Lucas shouting again, "Mom." His voice echoed across the dark water, but the panic in his voice sounded strange to me now. Forced, like a performance. I watched carefully as two figures moved near the railing. Madison grabbed Lucas's arm again. "Lucas, stop," she said loudly. "You'll fall too." "I have to help her," Lucas insisted. Madison shook her head. "You can't even see where she is." Another pause. Then Madison raised her voice deliberately. "We need to call the Coast Guard." Lucas didn't respond. The silence that followed felt heavy. Then Madison said something quieter, something meant only for Lucas. Unfortunately for them, the night air carried sound across the water. "It's over," she whispered. Lucas didn't answer immediately. I could barely make out his silhouette against the yacht's lights. Finally, he spoke. "What if she survives?" Madison let out a short laugh. "Lucas, we're 15 miles from shore." The words drifted down to me clearly. "She's 63 years old," Madison continued calmly. "In water this cold, she won't last an hour." My chest tightened. It's strange hearing someone calmly calculate your death. Lucas still sounded uncertain. "We should at least send a life ring," he said. Madison's voice hardened. "And explain why the cameras were off." That ended the argument. A few seconds later, the engines of the yacht began to rumble louder. The massive vessel slowly started moving forward again, leaving me behind. For a moment, a wave of emotion crashed through me. Not fear, not anger, something deeper. The painful realization that my son had just watched me disappear into the ocean and chosen to sail away. The yacht's lights grew smaller as it moved farther across the water. Eventually, it became nothing more than a distant glow on the horizon. Then even that disappeared. Darkness surrounded me completely. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. Cold water lapped against my shoulders as the waves rolled beneath me. For the first time since falling into the water, I allowed myself to fully feel the reality of my situation. I was alone, miles from land, floating in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in the middle of the night. But not for long. I lifted one hand slowly and pressed the small transmitter button hidden inside my jacket pocket. A tiny green light blinked once. Signal sent. Detective Raymond Brooks would know exactly where I was. Now I just had to survive long enough for him to reach me. The minutes that followed felt endless. The cold crept deeper into my body with each passing moment. My fingers began to stiffen. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. I focused on staying calm, floating, breathing slowly, keeping my movements minimal. Somewhere far away, a faint sound reached my ears. At first, I thought it might be my imagination. Then the sound grew louder. An engine. Not the deep rumble of the yacht. Something smaller, faster. A light appeared on the horizon, a single beam cutting across the darkness. The boat approached quickly, bouncing slightly over the waves as it moved closer. When it reached me, a strong flashlight illuminated the water. "There," a familiar voice shouted. "Cynthia." Detective Raymond Brooks leaned over the side of the boat, extending his arm. Two other men, members of his small support crew, helped pull me out of the freezing water. The moment my body left the ocean, the full weight of the cold hit me. My muscles trembled violently as they wrapped a thick thermal blanket around my shoulders. Raymond knelt beside me. "You're safe now," he said firmly. I tried to speak, but my teeth were chattering too hard. Raymond nodded to one of the crew members. "Get the heater going." Warm air soon filled the small cabin of the rescue boat as they helped me inside. Raymond handed me a cup of steaming coffee. "Slow sips," he advised. I wrapped my shaking hands around the cup and took a careful drink. Warmth spread slowly through my chest. For several minutes, none of us spoke. Finally, Raymond broke the silence. We heard everything he said. My eyes met his. The conversation, all of it, he confirmed. The recorder in my travel bag had transmitted the audio signal directly to Raymond's monitoring equipment. Every word Lucas and Madison spoke had been captured. Raymond leaned back in his seat. "They believed you were dead the moment you hit the water," he said. I nodded slowly. "They sailed away." "Yes." Raymond's expression hardened. "Which means we now have clear evidence of attempted murder." The words felt strange to hear out loud. Attempted murder. Committed by my own son. The boat turned slowly toward the distant shoreline. Far ahead, faint lights from the California coast shimmered against the horizon. Raymond watched me carefully. "How are you holding up?" I stared at the dark ocean behind us. Somewhere out there, Lucas and Madison were probably celebrating their success, planning their next steps, preparing to claim the $520 million they believed would soon belong to them. "They think I'm dead," I said quietly. Raymond nodded. "Yes." For a moment, I considered the possibilities. Lucas would likely report the accident eventually. There would be grief, public sympathy, a tragic story of a wealthy widow slipping from a yacht in the middle of the night. Madison would comfort him. They would inherit everything, but only if I stayed dead. I looked back at Raymond. "Good," I said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. "Good." I nodded slowly. "They think they've won." Raymond's eyes narrowed as he began to understand. "You're planning something." "Yes." The ocean wind rattled softly against the boat windows as we sped toward shore. Lucas and Madison believed they had committed the perfect crime, but in reality, they had just given me the opportunity to expose everything. And when they finally returned home, they would discover something they never expected. I would be waiting for them, alive. The rescue boat reached the marina just before sunrise. The eastern sky had begun to lighten, turning the horizon a faint shade of silver as the long night finally started to fade. After hours in the cold water and another hour wrapped in blankets on Raymond Brooks' boat, the warmth slowly returning to my body felt almost surreal. I stepped onto the dock with unsteady legs. Raymond stayed close beside me, one hand hovering near my elbow in case I needed support. "You should see a doctor," he said quietly. "I will," I replied. "But first we need to finish this." Raymond studied my face carefully. "You're stronger than most people I know, Cynthia." I managed a small smile. 40 years running a shipping company teaches you a few things about survival. We drove straight to Andrew Keller's office. The city was just waking up when we arrived. Commuters filled the streets, coffee shops opened their doors, and the world moved forward completely unaware that just hours earlier, I had nearly died in the Pacific Ocean. Andrew was already waiting when we entered. He looked relieved the moment he saw me. "Thank God," he said, standing quickly from behind his desk. I hugged him briefly. "Thank you for believing my instincts." Andrew gestured for us to sit. Raymond placed a small recorder on the table. "Everything's here," he said. Andrew pressed play. The room filled with the quiet, unmistakable voices of Lucas and Madison from the yacht. "Once it's done, it'll look like she slipped. The cameras are off. One push and the $520 million becomes ours?" Hearing those words again made my chest tighten. Andrew let the recording play for nearly 2 minutes before pausing it. "This is more than enough," he said grimly. "For attempted murder?" I asked. "For conspiracy, attempted homicide, and obstruction," Andrew replied. Raymond crossed his arms. "And that's just the beginning." Andrew leaned forward. "But there's something we need to decide quickly." "What?" Andrew folded his hands together. "Right now, Lucas and Madison believe you're dead." I nodded slowly. "That's what they wanted. And that gives us an advantage," Andrew continued, "but only for a short time." Raymond understood immediately. "If they report the accident first, they'll control the narrative," he said. Andrew nodded. "They'll say Cynthia slipped overboard and they tried to save her." Raymond leaned back. "Which means the next move has to be ours." The room grew quiet. I stared at the city skyline through Andrew's office window. Miguel used to say business was a lot like chess. You don't win by reacting to your opponent's moves. You win by forcing them into positions they never expected. Lucas and Madison believed they had removed the final obstacle between them and $500 million, but they had made one fatal mistake. They assumed the game was over. I turned back to Andrew. "I want them to believe it a little longer." Andrew raised an eyebrow. "You want them to think you're still dead?" "Yes." Raymond looked intrigued. "Explain." I stood and walked slowly across the office, organizing my thoughts. "Right now, Lucas and Madison think they committed the perfect crime," I said. "They'll go home. They'll begin preparing for the trust transfer." Andrew nodded. "And when they do that, they'll reveal their intentions completely." Raymond smiled faintly. "Financial moves leave a trail." "Exactly," I said. Andrew leaned back in his chair. "You want them comfortable." "Yes." Raymond chuckled quietly. "So they walk straight into the trap." Andrew looked thoughtful for a moment. "It could work," he admitted. "But we have to be careful." I nodded. "We control when the truth comes out." Raymond tapped the recorder. "With this evidence, the police can arrest them whenever we're ready." Andrew turned to me again. "When do you want to confront them?" I didn't hesitate. "When they return home." Raymond's eyes lit slightly. "The house." "Yes." Andrew smiled slowly. "That will certainly be memorable." I allowed myself a small, cold satisfaction. Lucas and Madison expected to walk into my house believing they had inherited everything. Instead, they would find something very different waiting for them. Andrew picked up the phone. "I'll contact the police and prepare them for the arrest," he said. "But we won't move until Cynthia gives the signal." Raymond nodded. "I'll monitor Lucas and Madison's movements." "Good," Andrew said. Within hours, the plan was in motion. Raymond's team tracked the yacht returning to the marina. Lucas and Madison disembarked shortly after noon. Raymond showed us photos taken from a distance. Lucas looked pale. Madison looked composed. "She's the one keeping him together," Raymond observed. "That doesn't surprise me," I replied. Andrew leaned over the table. "They're driving to your house." "My house?" "The place where Lucas had grown up, where Miguel and I had celebrated birthdays, holidays, family dinners. Now it would become the stage for something very different." Raymond checked his watch. "They'll be there in 20 minutes." Andrew closed his briefcase. "The police are already inside." My heart beat steadily. Not with fear, with something else. Justice. For years I had built my life believing family meant loyalty. Now I was about to confront the reality that loyalty had limits. Raymond looked at me carefully. "You ready for this?" I took a deep breath. "Yes." Outside Andrew's office window, the afternoon sun reflected off the water of San Diego Bay. Somewhere across the city, Lucas and Madison were driving toward my house. They probably believed the next chapter of their lives was beginning, but they were about to discover something very different. Because when they opened the door, they would find me waiting, alive, and everything they thought they had stolen would vanish in a single moment. The drive back to my house felt strangely calm. Raymond drove while Andrew sat in the passenger seat reviewing notes on his tablet. I sat quietly in the back watching the familiar streets of San Diego pass by outside the window. Palm trees, morning traffic, people walking their dogs or heading to work. Everything looked so ordinary. And yet somewhere ahead of us, Lucas and Madison were driving toward the same destination, believing their lives had just changed forever. Raymond broke the silence first. "Our team confirmed they left the marina about 20 minutes ago," he said. "They're heading straight to your house." Andrew glanced over his shoulder at me. "Are you certain you want to be there when they arrive?" "Yes. You don't have to confront them personally," he said gently. "The police can handle the arrest." I shook my head. "No." Both men waited for me to continue. "My son tried to kill me," I said quietly. "If I don't look him in the eyes when the truth comes out, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Andrew nodded slowly. I understand. Raymond pulled the car into the long, private road leading up to my property. The house sat on a bluff overlooking the ocean, surrounded by tall eucalyptus trees that swayed gently in the coastal breeze. Miguel and I had built it nearly 20 years earlier. Every corner of it held memories. Birthday parties, family dinners, Lucas riding his bicycle down the driveway when he was 12. The car stopped near the front gate. 2 unmarked police vehicles were already parked nearby. Raymond stepped out first and opened my door. You ready? I nodded. We walked inside together. The interior of the house was quiet but not empty. 3 detectives and 2 uniformed officers waited in the living room. Andrew quickly introduced me. This is Cynthia Perez, he said. The lead detective, a tall woman named Lieutenant Karen Wallace, shook my hand. Ma'am, she said respectfully, I'm glad you're safe. Thank you. Karen gestured toward the large window overlooking the driveway. We've positioned officers around the property. Once they enter the house, we'll move. Andrew checked his watch. They should be here any minute. I walked slowly across the living room and sat down on the long gray sofa facing the front entrance. From where I sat, the doorway was clearly visible. Raymond leaned casually against the wall beside me. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to, he said quietly. I shook my head. Oh, I plan to say something. Minutes passed. The room remained silent except for the faint sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below the house. Then finally, the distant sound of a car approaching. Everyone in the room turned toward the window. A black sedan rolled slowly up the driveway. Lucas's car. Raymond glanced at the officers. Positions. The detectives moved quietly into place. 2 stood just out of sight near the hallway. Another waited beside the kitchen entrance. Andrew sat calmly in a chair across from me. The front door remained closed. Through the window, I watched Lucas step out of the car. His shoulders looked tense. Madison emerged from the passenger side moments later, adjusting her sunglasses as if she had just returned from a normal day trip. They walked toward the front door together. Lucas hesitated before unlocking it. For a brief moment, I wondered what he was feeling. Guilt, fear, relief. Then the door opened. Lucas stepped inside first. Mom, he called out automatically. The word echoed through the house. Madison followed him into the foyer. And then they both saw me, sitting on the sofa, alive. For a moment, neither of them moved. Lucas's face drained of color instantly. His eyes widened as if he had seen a ghost. Mom, he whispered. Madison's reaction was different. Shock flashed across her face, but only for a fraction of a second. Then calculation returned to her eyes. How, she started to say. I stood slowly. The silence in the room felt heavy enough to break. You look surprised, I said calmly. Lucas staggered backwards slightly. That's impossible, he stammered. Madison stepped forward quickly. Cynthia, we thought. You thought I drowned. The words cut through the room like glass. Lucas looked as if he might collapse. Madison tried again. You slipped off the deck, she said quickly. We tried to find you, but... Stop. My voice was quiet, but it stopped her instantly. I took a step closer. Do you want to hear the part you missed? I asked. Lucas stared at me, trembling. What do you mean? I glanced briefly at Andrew. He nodded and pressed a button on the small speaker device resting on the coffee table. The room filled with sound. Madison's voice. Once it's done, it'll look like she slipped. Lucas froze. The cameras are off. Madison's face turned pale. One push and the 520 million becomes ours. The recording continued for several seconds before Andrew turned it off. The silence that followed was absolute. Lucas looked like someone had ripped the air out of his lungs. Madison's expression hardened. This is manipulated, she said sharply. You can't prove. That's enough. Lieutenant Wallace stepped forward from the hallway. Madison spun around in shock as the officers entered the room. Lucas stared at them in disbelief. Lucas Perez Wallace said calmly, You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted homicide. Madison backed away slowly. You can't... Madison Cole Perez Wallace continued, You are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. Lucas's legs gave out. He collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands. Madison tried to protest as the officers moved forward. This is insane, she shouted. You have no proof. Raymond stepped forward. We have audio recordings, GPS data, and multiple witnesses. The handcuffs clicked into place. Lucas looked up at me as the officers pulled him to his feet. His eyes were filled with something I had never seen before. Desperation. Mom, he whispered. For a moment, the little boy he once was flickered across his face. But that boy had disappeared a long time ago. You stopped being my son, I said quietly, the moment you planned my death. The officers led them both toward the door. Madison still shouted protests. Lucas said nothing. And just like that, the perfect crime they thought they had committed collapsed around them. The moment the handcuffs clicked shut around Lucas's wrists, the house felt strangely quiet. For years, this living room had been filled with laughter, conversations, holiday gatherings, and family dinners. Now, the same space held police officers, legal evidence, and the shattered remains of the life I once believed I had. Lucas stood in the center of the room, his hands bound in front of him, staring at the floor. Madison's reaction was the opposite. She struggled against the officer holding her arm, her voice sharp with anger. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You can't arrest us based on some recording." Lieutenant Wallace remained calm. "We have more than a recording," she said evenly. Madison turned toward me, her expression suddenly shifting. For the first time since entering the house, her composure cracked. "You set us up," she said. Her voice was low, almost admiring. "You knew." I met her gaze without hesitation. "Yes." Lucas looked up slowly. You knew?" he asked weakly. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked across the room until I stood directly in front of him. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but emotionally. The man standing in front of me no longer resembled the son I had raised. "You planned my death," I said quietly. Lucas's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, I didn't—" "Don't." The single word stopped him instantly. Madison watched us both, her face cold again. "You're wasting your breath," she said to Lucas. "This is just a strategy." The officer tightened his grip on her arm. "Ma'am, you should stop talking." Madison ignored him. She looked directly at me. "You can't prove we pushed you." She was technically correct. I had jumped. But the law didn't require them to physically push me. Their planning alone was enough. Andrew Keller stepped forward. "The recording clearly demonstrates conspiracy," he said calmly. "The disabled cameras also support intent." Madison laughed bitterly. "Please. Wealthy families fight over money all the time." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "This will fall apart in court." Raymond Brooks finally spoke. "You might want to reconsider that confidence." Madison glanced at him. "And who are you?" "Someone who documented everything," Raymond replied. He held up a folder containing printed evidence. Audio transcripts, GPS tracking data, and witness testimony. Madison's confidence flickered for a moment. Lucas looked completely broken now. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of the situation had finally crushed whatever denial remained. "Mom," he said again. This time his voice sounded small, almost childlike. "I was scared." The room fell silent. He lifted his head slowly. "After Dad died, everything changed." His words came out unevenly. "The company, the trust, all the responsibility." I listened without interrupting. Lucas swallowed hard. I felt like I was always living in his shadow. Madison rolled her eyes. "Lucas, stop." But he continued. "I thought if I controlled everything, maybe I'd finally feel like I was enough." His voice cracked. "But I didn't plan it at first," he insisted. "Madison just kept saying." Madison snapped her head toward him. "Lucas." But it was too late. The truth had already begun spilling out. "You said Mom would never step aside." Lucas continued looking at Madison. "You said she'd keep controlling everything forever." Madison's expression hardened. "Don't be weak." Lucas stared at her in disbelief. "We were supposed to just pressure her," he said. "You said the yacht trip was just to scare her." Madison laughed again, colder this time. "You're unbelievable." She looked at me. "See what I had to work with." Lucas's face twisted in pain. "You said it was the only way," he whispered. Madison shrugged slightly. "Well, it almost worked." That sentence hung in the air like poison. Lieutenant Wallace nodded to the officers. "That's enough." They began leading Lucas and Madison toward the door. Lucas turned one last time before leaving. "Mom, I'm sorry." The words sounded sincere, but sincerity doesn't erase betrayal. I didn't respond. The front door closed behind them as the police escorted them outside. The distant sound of the patrol car doors opening echoed across the driveway. Then the engine started. Within minutes, the vehicles disappeared down the long road leading away from the house. Silence returned. Raymond exhaled slowly. "Well," he said, "that went about as expected." Andrew adjusted his glasses. "Better, actually." He held up the recorder again. "Lucas just confessed to conspiracy in front of multiple witnesses." Raymond nodded. "That will help the prosecution." I sat down slowly on the sofa again. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation began fading, leaving exhaustion behind. Andrew sat across from me. How are you feeling? I considered the question. Relieved, angry, heartbroken. All of those emotions existed at once. But another feeling slowly rose above them. Closure. They made their choices, I said quietly. Raymond crossed his arms. And now they'll face the consequences. Andrew looked thoughtful. This case will attract a lot of media attention. That doesn't matter, I replied. Raymond gave a small nod. You're tougher than most people in your position would be. I glanced toward the front door. The same door Lucas had walked through countless times as a child. The same door he had just walked through again in handcuffs. Life rarely gives you the endings you expect. Sometimes the people you trust the most become the ones who hurt you the deepest. But sometimes justice arrives exactly when it should. And for the first time since that night on the yacht, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The house felt emptier after the police cars disappeared down the road. Not quieter because the ocean was still there, waves crashing steadily against the cliffs below, but emptier in a way that had nothing to do with sound. For decades, this house had been the center of our family life. Miguel and I built it during one of the happiest periods of our lives, when the company was growing and Lucas was just beginning high school. Every corner held a memory. The long dining table where we celebrated birthdays. The kitchen where Lucas once tried to cook pancakes at midnight and nearly burned them. The patio where Miguel and I watched the sunset together after long workdays. Now those same rooms felt like echoes of a life that no longer existed. Raymond Brooks stood near the window watching the last police vehicle disappear. Well, he said quietly, that chapter is officially closed. Andrew Keller was gathering documents from the coffee table. Not completely, he corrected. The trial will take time. I nodded slowly. The legal process was just beginning. Lucas and Madison would be formally charged, arraigned, and eventually tried in court. Their lawyers would argue, deny, and attempt to dismantle the evidence. But the truth had already been recorded. And truth has a stubborn way of surviving even the most desperate lies. Raymond turned back toward me. You should get some rest. I almost laughed. After falling into the Pacific Ocean and confronting my son for attempted murder, Raymond shrugged slightly. Even strong people need sleep. Andrew agreed. He's right. You've been through a lot in the last 12 hours. I stood and walked slowly toward the window. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the cliffs, its deep blue surface reflecting the afternoon sun. Miguel loved this view. He used to stand here every morning with a cup of coffee watching cargo ships pass in the distance. Sometimes he would point at one and say that one might be ours. Those ships had once represented everything we worked for. Security, opportunity, a future for our family. Now the same ocean reminded me how close I had come to dying. Andrew, I said quietly, yes, I want to make some changes to the trust. He didn't seem surprised. I assumed you might. Raymond leaned against the wall listening. What kind of changes? Andrew asked. I turned back toward him. The original structure Miguel and I created, it assumed Lucas would eventually inherit responsibility. Andrew nodded. Yes, that assumption is no longer valid. He understood immediately. You want to revise the beneficiaries? Yes. Raymond raised an eyebrow. That's a big decision. It already was, I replied. Andrew sat down again and opened his laptop. We can restructure the trust in several ways, he explained. Charitable foundations, distributed beneficiaries, long-term endowments. I thought about Miguel. About the years we spent building our company from nothing. About the people who helped us along the way. Dock workers, drivers, office staff, and partners who believed in us when we were still struggling. We built something meaningful, I said slowly. I don't want that legacy to disappear because of greed. Andrew nodded. What are you thinking? I took a deep breath. A foundation. Raymond smiled slightly. That sounds promising. Andrew began typing notes. What kind of foundation? I looked out at the ocean again. Something connected to the water. Raymond tilted his head. Ocean conservation. Yes. Andrew's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. That aligns with the company's history. And I want another part dedicated to protecting elderly people from financial abuse, I added. Raymond's expression softened. That's personal. Yes, I said simply. Andrew finished typing and closed the laptop. We can begin drafting the new structure immediately. Raymond glanced at his phone. The news is already spreading. What news? I asked. He showed me the screen. A breaking headline from a local news site read, ****. San Diego business heir arrested in alleged yacht murder plot. ****. The article included a photo of Lucas being escorted into a police vehicle. I felt a strange mixture of sadness and inevitability. This story would spread quickly. The media loved scandals involving wealth betrayal and family drama, but the headlines didn't matter to me. The truth mattered. Raymond put the phone away. This is going to get messy. Andrew sighed. It always does. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Raymond said something unexpected. You know what surprises me the most? What I asked. You jumped. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? You could have waited for them to push you, he said. Instead, you took control of the moment. I thought back to the deck of the yacht, the wind, the stars. Lucas standing behind me. I realized something I said quietly. What? If I waited for them to act, I would always be reacting to their choices. Raymond nodded slowly. So you made your own? Yes. Andrew smiled faintly. That's probably why you built a $500 million company. The afternoon light shifted across the living room floor as the sun moved lower in the sky. Soon evening would arrive again. But this night would be different from the last one. No yachts, no whispered conspiracies, no cold ocean waiting in the darkness. Just quiet. And the beginning of whatever came next. I looked around the living room one more time. The house still held memories, but it also held something else now. A future that belonged entirely to me. The trial began 6 months later. In that time, life moved forward in ways that felt both slow and strangely fast. Lawyers filed motions. Evidence was analyzed. Witnesses were interviewed. The case quickly grew into one of the most talked about legal battles in California that year. The media loved every detail. A wealthy business family, a $520 million trust, a son accused of trying to murder his own mother on a yacht in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. For reporters, it was the kind of story that seemed almost unreal. For me, it was simply my life. Andrew Keller handled most of the legal preparation. His calm professionalism helped keep the situation grounded, while the outside world turned it into headlines. One afternoon, about 2 weeks before the trial, Andrew sat across from me in my dining room with a thick stack of documents. They're going to argue intent, he explained. What does that mean, I asked. Madison's attorneys claim the conversation on the yacht was hypothetical, he said. They'll say it was a discussion about financial fears, not an actual murder plan. I almost laughed. They discussed disabling the cameras. Yes, Andrew agreed, which is why their argument will fail. The evidence against them had grown stronger over time. The yacht company confirmed that the deck cameras had indeed been manually shut off that night. GPS records showed the exact moment the yacht slowed near the location where I fell into the water. Raymond Brooks had also provided detailed testimony about the monitoring equipment and the audio recordings. Still, the legal system moves carefully. Every claim must be examined. Every defense must be heard. The morning the trial began, the courthouse was surrounded by reporters. Camera crews stood near the steps while journalists spoke into microphones about the case. Cynthia Perez, the San Diego shipping executive who survived an alleged murder attempt by her own son. The words sounded surreal even after months of preparation. Raymond walked beside me as we entered the building. You okay? He asked quietly. Yes. Andrew joined us inside the lobby. They're already seated, he said. The courtroom felt colder than I expected. Lucas sat at the defense table wearing a dark suit that made him look thinner than before. Months in jail had clearly changed him. Madison sat beside him, her posture straight and controlled. When Lucas noticed me entering the room, his eyes dropped immediately to the table. Madison did the opposite. She stared directly at me. Her expression was calm, almost challenging. I took my seat beside Andrew. The judge entered shortly afterward, and the courtroom rose. Be seated. The prosecutor began with the opening statement. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she said clearly, this case is about greed. It is about betrayal, and it is about two individuals who believed they could eliminate a human life in order to gain control of $520 million. She described the yacht trip, the disabled cameras, the recorded conversation, the planned accident. As she spoke, I watched Lucas carefully. He never looked up. Madison remained composed, whispering occasionally to her attorney. When the defense gave their opening statement, their strategy became clear. This case is built on assumptions, Madison's lawyer argued. A family argument was misinterpreted as a crime. He suggested that the yacht incident had been an unfortunate accident. He suggested the recording was taken out of context. But as the trial progressed, the evidence became impossible to ignore. Raymond Brooks testified first. He described how he had been hired as a precaution before the trip. How far was your boat from the yacht, the prosecutor asked. Approximately 1 mile, Raymond answered. And you were monitoring audio transmissions during that time? Yes. He calmly explained how the recording captured the conversation between Lucas and Madison. The defense attorney tried to challenge him. You never saw my clients push Miss Perez into the water, correct? That's correct, Raymond said. But you're assuming their intent. Raymond shook his head. I'm reporting what they said. Next, the yacht company representative testified about the disabled cameras. They were manually turned off at 11:52 p.m., he confirmed. By whom, the prosecutor asked. The captain. Captain Derek Shaw had already agreed to cooperate with prosecutors after facing charges himself. His testimony was devastating. Lucas Perez asked me to shut the cameras off, Derek admitted. The courtroom grew quiet. Madison's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the damage was done. Finally, it was my turn to testify. Andrew squeezed my shoulder before I walked to the witness stand. I took the oath and sat down. The prosecutor approached gently. Miss Perez, can you tell the jury why you hired Detective Brooks before the yacht trip? Because I was becoming concerned about my son's behavior, I said. What kind of behavior? Pressure regarding control of a family trust worth approximately $520 million. The prosecutor nodded. And what happened on the yacht that night? I described everything. The conversation I overheard. The plan they discussed. The moment on the deck when I realized they intended to push me. The cold water. The rescue boat waiting nearby. When I finished, the courtroom remained silent. Then the defense attorney approached. Miss Perez, he said carefully, is it possible your son was simply frightened about financial responsibility? I met his eyes. Fear does not make someone plan murder. The jury watched closely. Did you see Lucas physically push you? He asked. No. Then isn't it true you jumped into the water yourself? Yes. He smiled slightly. So the alleged murder attempt never actually happened. I leaned forward slightly. They planned it. The room felt completely still. They disabled cameras, I continued. They discussed my death as a financial strategy, and they left me in the ocean believing I would drown. The attorney said nothing more. When I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt a strange calm. The truth had been spoken. Now the jury would decide what came next. The courtroom felt heavier as the trial moved into its final week. By that point, every piece of evidence had been presented. Every witness had spoken. The story of what happened on that yacht was no longer just my memory. It had become a timeline, built from recordings, testimony, and facts. But the final outcome still rested with 12 strangers sitting quietly in the jury box. They watched everything carefully. They studied every expression. They listened to every word. And I could see the weight of the decision slowly settling over them. Lucas looked different now. The confident executive who once ran meetings at Perez Global Shipping had vanished. In his place sat a man who looked exhausted, hollow, and years older than when the trial began. Madison, however, had not changed much at all. She still carried herself with the same cold composure I had noticed the first day she walked into our lives. Her lawyers whispered constantly in her ear, but she rarely showed any emotion. Sometimes I wondered if she truly believed she would still walk away from this. The final day of testimony belonged to Captain Derek Shaw. When he entered the courtroom, the tension in the room increased immediately. Derek had once been a quiet professional yacht captain. Now he was the final witness tying the entire story together. The prosecutor approached him calmly. Mr. Shaw, can you explain your role on the yacht the night Cynthia Perez fell into the water? Derek shifted slightly in his chair. I was the captain of the vessel, he said. Who asked you to disable the deck cameras? Derek hesitated for a moment. Then he looked directly at the jury. Lucas Perez. A ripple of whispers passed through the courtroom. Madison's attorney stood quickly. Objection, overruled the judge said. The prosecutor continued. What reason did Mr. Perez give for turning off the cameras? Derek swallowed. He said it was for privacy. And did you believe that? No. The prosecutor let the answer settle before asking the next question. Did you witness anything else unusual that night? Derek nodded slowly. I saw Mr. Perez and Miss Cole speaking together near the back deck shortly before Miss Perez fell into the water. Did you hear what they were saying? Not clearly. The defense attorney stood for cross-examination. Mr. Shaw, he began sharply, you were charged with obstruction of justice in this case, correct? Yes. And you agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges? Yes. So your testimony benefits you personally? Derek didn't hesitate. Yes. The defense attorney paced slowly. Isn't it possible that you're simply telling the story prosecutors want to hear? Derek shook his head. I'm telling the truth. The attorney tried several more questions, but nothing changed the essential facts. The cameras were turned off. The recorded conversation existed, and Lucas and Madison had left the scene believing I would drown. By the time Derek stepped down from the witness stand, the defense strategy had clearly weakened. That afternoon, both sides delivered their closing arguments. The prosecutor stood before the jury with quiet confidence. This case is not complicated, she said. It is about two people who believed money was more important than a human life. She reminded the jury about the recording, the disabled cameras, the decision to leave me in the ocean. Even after Cynthia Perez fell into the water, she continued the defendants made no serious attempt to rescue her. She paused before delivering the final sentence. They believed the ocean would finish the job for them. When the defense attorney spoke, his tone was more restrained. He emphasized uncertainty, lack of direct physical evidence, the fact that I had jumped. But even as he spoke, it was clear his argument was fragile, because intent had already been proven. After closing arguments ended, the judge addressed the jury. You will now retire to deliberate. The 12 jurors stood and quietly left the courtroom. The waiting began. Those hours were some of the longest of my life. Andrew sat beside me reviewing legal notes. Raymond remained near the back wall of the courtroom, his arms folded. Lucas stared at the table in front of him. Madison whispered occasionally with her attorney. No one spoke to me, which was fine. There was nothing left to say. 3 hours passed, then 4. Finally, just before evening, the courtroom doors opened. The jury returned. Everyone stood. The foreperson handed a sealed envelope to the judge. The silence in the room felt almost unbearable. The judge opened the envelope and read the verdict silently before looking up. In the matter of the state versus Lucas Perez and Madison Cole Perez, Lucas gripped the edge of the table. Madison remained perfectly still. The judge continued. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, he paused briefly. We find the defendant, Madison Cole Perez, guilty. Madison's composure cracked for the first time. Her face turned pale as murmurs spread across the courtroom. The judge continued reading. On the charge of attempted homicide, we find the defendant, Lucas Perez, guilty. Lucas closed his eyes slowly. The final verdict followed moments later. Madison received the harsher conviction. The court determined she had been the primary architect of the plan. Lucas was also convicted, but would likely receive a slightly lesser sentence due to his cooperation during testimony. As the judge spoke, the weight of the moment settled over the courtroom. The case was over. Justice had been delivered. Madison finally spoke as officers approached to escort them away. This isn't over, she snapped, but her voice no longer carried the same confidence. Lucas looked at me one last time before being led out. He didn't say anything, and neither did I, because sometimes silence says everything. The courthouse felt different after the verdict. For months, the building had been filled with tension arguments and the constant weight of uncertainty. Now, as people slowly filed out of the courtroom, that tension had finally broken. Justice had spoken, but justice does not erase what happened. Outside the courthouse, reporters were already waiting. Microphones and cameras pointed toward the courthouse steps, hoping for statements or reactions. Andrew Keller had warned me this would happen, and we had agreed on a simple strategy: say as little as possible. Still, the moment I stepped outside, questions came from every direction. Miss Perez, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you forgive your son? What will happen to the $520 million trust? Now, flashes from cameras reflected off the courthouse walls. I paused for only a moment before answering. The jury made the right decision, I said calmly. Now I would like to focus on moving forward. Andrew gently guided me toward the waiting car before any more questions could follow. Once the door closed and the noise faded behind us, I exhaled slowly. Raymond Brooks sat in the passenger seat, glancing back at me. You handled that well, he said. I shrugged slightly. After everything that's happened, reporters don't feel very intimidating. Andrew allowed himself a small smile. That's probably true. The car pulled away from the courthouse and merged into the afternoon traffic. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then Raymond finally asked the question that had been hanging quietly in the air all day. How do you feel now? I thought about it carefully. Relief, certainly. Closure in some ways. But also something more complicated. You don't raise a child for nearly 40 years and walk away from that without scars, I said quietly. Raymond nodded. That makes sense. Andrew turned slightly in his seat. The sentencing hearing will take place in a few weeks, he said. After that, the case will officially close. And Madison, I asked. Based on the conviction and the evidence presented, she'll likely receive a long sentence. And Lucas, Andrew hesitated. Less than Madison, because, but still significant. I looked out the window as the coastline appeared in the distance. Somewhere out there was the same ocean that had nearly taken my life. But strangely, I didn't feel anger when I thought about it anymore. Just distance. That chapter of my life had ended. A few weeks later, I returned to the courthouse one final time for the sentencing. Lucas and Madison stood before the judge again, but this time the atmosphere felt different. The uncertainty was gone. Only consequences remained. Madison received the longest sentence. The judge made it clear that her leadership in the conspiracy played a major role in the decision. Lucas's sentence was slightly shorter, but still severe enough to ensure he would spend many years behind bars. When the hearing ended, Lucas looked toward me briefly as the guards led him away. There were no words exchanged. Some things cannot be repaired. After that day, I rarely returned to the courthouse. Instead, I focused on something entirely different, rebuilding my life. Andrew and I finalized the restructuring of the trust exactly as we had discussed months earlier. The new organization became known as the *** Perez Ocean Foundation, ***. The foundation served two main purposes. The first was environmental protection, specifically programs dedicated to preserving ocean ecosystems along the California coast. The second focused on protecting elderly individuals from financial abuse and exploitation. That second mission was deeply personal, because I now understood how easily trust could be manipulated when money and power were involved. Launching the foundation gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. I traveled frequently during the following year, meeting with nonprofit leaders, environmental scientists, and legal advocates who work to protect vulnerable communities. Instead of boardroom meetings about profit margins, I was now discussing coral restoration, marine wildlife protection, and legal support programs for seniors facing financial exploitation. The work felt meaningful in a way business success never had. One afternoon, nearly a year after the trial ended, I was visiting a small coastal research center funded by the foundation. The building sat on a quiet stretch of beach north of San Diego. Scientists there were studying ways to restore damaged kelp forests along the shoreline. As I walked along the sand with the lead researcher, the ocean breeze carried the same familiar scent of salt and sea air. "You must have quite a connection to the ocean," the researcher said casually. I smiled slightly. "You could say that." We stopped near the water's edge as waves rolled toward the shore. For a moment, I simply watched the horizon. A year earlier, I had been floating in that same ocean, believing I might die there. Now I stood safely on land, watching the waves with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in a very long time. Life has a strange way of reshaping itself after tragedy. You lose things you thought would last forever, but sometimes you also discover strength you never knew you had. And sometimes the future waiting ahead of you is better than anything you imagined before. As the sun slowly began to set over the Pacific, I realized something important. For the first time since that night on the yacht, I was finally free. 2 years after the trial, my life looked nothing like the one I had lived before that night on the yacht. In some ways that was a loss, but in many ways it was a gift. The Perez Ocean Foundation had grown far beyond anything I expected. What began as a small organization focused on coastal conservation had expanded into a network of projects along the entire California shoreline. We funded marine research, restored damaged kelp forests, and partnered with universities studying ocean ecosystems. Fishermen scientists, environmental advocates, and local communities all became part of the work. But the second branch of the foundation, the one dedicated to protecting elderly individuals from financial abuse, became just as important to me. Every week, our legal assistance program received calls from seniors facing manipulation, coercion, or exploitation from family members and caregivers. Some of the stories were heartbreaking. Others were infuriating. But each case reminded me why the foundation existed. Because betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people you trust the most. One afternoon, I returned home after visiting a coastal research site. The house felt peaceful again. For a long time after the trial, I considered selling it. Too many memories were attached to the place, some beautiful, others painful. But eventually I realized something. The house didn't didn't belong to those memories. It belonged to me. I walked through the living room where Lucas had been arrested 2 years earlier. The furniture had changed, the walls had been repainted, and sunlight filled the space through the wide ocean-facing windows. It felt different now, lighter. The front doorbell rang. I frowned slightly. I wasn't expecting visitors. When I opened the door, a young woman stood on the porch. She looked nervous. Early 20s, dark hair, familiar eyes. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. Then realization settled in. "Sophia," I said quietly. She nodded. "Yes, Grandma, Lucas's daughter. I hadn't seen her since the trial. At the time, she'd been studying at a university across the country and had nothing to do with what her parents planned. But the scandal still followed her everywhere. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside. "Of course." She walked slowly into the house, glancing around the living room as if revisiting a place from childhood. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me," she admitted. "Why wouldn't I asked gently. Her voice trembled slightly. "Because of my parents." I shook my head. "You didn't choose their actions." She looked relieved, but still uncertain. We sat down across from each other. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Sophia said something that surprised me. "I read everything about the foundation." "You did?" She nodded. "I've been volunteering with a marine research program at school." That made me smile. "Your grandfather would have loved that." Sophia looked down briefly. "I wish I'd known him better." "You would have liked him," I said. She took a deep breath. "I came here because I wanted to ask you something." "What is it?" "I don't want the Perez name to only be remembered for what my parents did." Her voice grew steadier. "I want to help fix it." I studied her face carefully. There was sincerity there, and determination. "What are you studying?" I asked. "Environmental science." That answer made something inside me warm. Miguel used to say the ocean had a way of bringing people back to who they really were. Perhaps he was right. "You want to work with the foundation?" I asked. "If you'll let me." I stood and walked to the large window overlooking the ocean. The same endless water stretched across the horizon, calm and steady. For a moment, I imagined Miguel standing beside me again, hands in his pockets, watching ships pass in the distance. Life had taken turns neither of us could have predicted, but perhaps the future still held something worth building. I turned back toward Sophia. "Yes," I said. Her eyes widened slightly. "Really? Yes." Relief spread across her face. "Thank you." I sat down again. "But understand something," I added gently. "This foundation isn't about money or reputation." "I know," she said quickly. "It's about responsibility." She nodded. "I understand." For a moment, we both looked toward the ocean again. 2 years earlier, I had nearly lost everything: my life, my family, my trust in the people closest to me. But life had not ended that night. Instead, it had forced me to start again. And sometimes starting again is exactly what a person needs. Because the truth about legacy isn't written in bank accounts or inheritances. It's written in what you choose to build after everything falls apart. The sun dipped slowly toward the horizon, painting the water gold. And for the first time in a very long time, the future felt wide open. Life has a way of revealing people's true character when money, power, and fear enter the picture. Many of us grow up believing family is the one place where betrayal can never happen. But the truth is more complicated. Trust is powerful, but it must also be protected. Cynthia Perez spent her life building a business, a family, and a legacy she believed would carry forward for generations. Yet in a single moment, greed almost destroyed everything she worked for. What saved her wasn't just preparation or intelligence, it was courage. The courage to listen to her instincts to act before it was too late and to face painful truths even when they came from the people she loved most. But the most important part of her story is what came after. She didn't allow bitterness to define the rest of her life. Instead of letting betrayal turn into revenge, she transformed it into purpose. By creating the Perez Ocean Foundation, she turned a tragedy into something that protects others and helps the world. That is the real meaning of strength. Strength is not only surviving the worst moment of your life, it is deciding what kind of person you will become afterward. So now I want to ask you something. If you were in Cynthia's position, would you have forgiven your son, or would you have done exactly what she did and chosen justice instead? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this move you, inspire you, or make you think about life a little differently, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Your support truly means a lot.